Welcome to this episode of the Crypto Fatcat and the Crypto Skeptic. I am Sean Fitzgerald, the Crypto Skeptic, and this is my partner in crime, Jonathan Levy, who is the Crypto Fatcat. Jonathan, we are seeing some volatile times in the stock market with currencies around the world. There's blaring headlines about how certain currencies are dropping dramatically and into historical levels. And the dollar, of course, is very strong at the moment. Stock market's weak. Bonds are growing. Bitcoin seems to be floating around this 20,000 per Bitcoin level. And I'm going to ask you an impossible question. And I'll headline it with, of course, this isn't investing advice.
Good.
And this question is unanswerable, but I want an answer. And the question is, where is the lower level for Bitcoin? Where is it going to drop down to? When is the ideal time if someone was wanting to buy at the bottom? What does that look like?
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely an impossible question. It's the kind of question I do get on a fairly regular basis. There's no actual way to answer that, of course. I would say if you think that the macro financial world is going to continue to do a downslide for the foreseeable future. I would say that's the general sentiment anyway. This probably isn't the bottom for Bitcoin. If you think it's going that direction, I would guess that would drag the price of Bitcoin down with it, as we've seen it do to some degree anyway. If you think inflation is going to start to turn around and we've sort of slowed it down and things are going to go better, or even if you're just sort of an anti-public, general sentiment person who I think in general, over time, that makes money, just sort of going against what most people think. Generally, that's a profitable way to do things. I don't know if that's going to be true in this case, but if the world macro situation improves, this might be the bottom. We might be right around the bottom, give or take, $1,000 in either direction. There's sort of two general thought processes I would have around trying to decide if we're at the bottom or not. And so it's really about what you think about the global macro economy, I think, because a lot of what we see with Bitcoin it has clearly been dragged in directions by the global macro economy. As we watch everything go down, Bitcoin has gone down as well. Now, there's been other factors at play with Bitcoin. I'm thinking of the Luna crash in March and the subsequent Three Arrows Capital insolvency, and that led to a domino effect on other insolvencies, which I think has crashed the price more than it otherwise would have. But still, it's hard to imagine, even in a best case scenario, meaning none of those things happen, Bitcoin being worth more than 35,000 right now, still a far cry from its all-time high, which was nearly 70,000. So if you think the world macro picture is going to continue to tumble downward, we're moving towards either a depression or 2 years of real pain, which is mostly what you hear, at least from a lot of folks these days. I would guess this is not the bottom. If that's true, this is not the bottom for Bitcoin. I think it's going to go lower. I think it can go as low as 15, maybe even as low as 10,000, depending on how bad the world macro situation is. That's about where I see it being really hard to imagine it getting below 10 personally, but it's really hard to know, of course. On the other hand, if we are not in that global macro tailspin, whirlpool of death, and in fact, we're about to sort of climb out of it. If you see the signs of inflation slowing down, which there are some signs of that at least, and you think governments are going to continue to take strong actions to try and improve the global economy, then perhaps we are at the bottom right now. So I don't know the answer, but what I would say is if Bitcoin is worth what I think it's going to be worth most of the time anyway, 10 to 15 years from now, even 5 years from now, this is a great time to buy. I mean, 15,000 is an even better time, but this would still be one of those things where you look back and you can't believe how lucky you were to get in at 20,000 or 19,000 or whatever we are right now. If you're buying one Bitcoin, sure, you'd rather have a better ROI, and sure, you'd rather spend $5,000 less to get a full Bitcoin, let's say. But if Bitcoin's worth $700,000 10 years from now, is it really going to matter if you bought it at 15 or 20? If you're going to buy more Bitcoin, if you're going to spend $20,000 on Bitcoin no matter what, yeah, then it will matter to you, right? Because then you'd have 1.3 Bitcoin instead of one Bitcoin. But a lot of people are just looking to, have that unit bias and want to buy one. And I would say we could be near the bottom if we're going to climb out of this. So it's hard to really know. I don't know how important it is if you have a long enough term view. We're probably near the bottom, even if the bottom is $10,000 lower from now. I think in the long run, when you zoom way out and look at the whole chart, that's not going to feel very different than 20,000. Just like when we zoom out right now, we look at Bitcoin when it was at $4 and then it dropped to $2. That doesn't feel like a big deal right now, but at the time it was devastating to people, and scary. And should they buy or should they wait, or is it going to go lower? And they were trying to time it all. And yeah, you could get more Bitcoin if you bought at 2 than 4. But if you bought a bunch of Bitcoin at $4, you're probably very wealthy right now, and it probably all worked out great. Timing the market didn't really matter.
Okay. Well, if we were to look at, Bitcoin at $250,000 per Bitcoin, which is something you referenced before, is,
Sure.
knocking it out of the park over 10 years. And yeah, that more is possible. And a lot of Bitcoin people think that it might go up to 500,000 or 1 million. But from your point of view, you'd shared $250,000 in 10 years would be something that you would think, yeah, I could see that as being like, from your point of view, quite realistic. So that would be, let's say 10 to 12x from where it is now. And so the equivalent wouldn't be $2 to $4 per Bitcoin. If we were to look at,
Right.
10 to 12x for where it's at now, it would be more like if I was buying it at 1,500 or 2,000 per Bitcoin, which I guess when you look at it that way also seems like no big deal. If I paid $2,000 and it's now worth 20, 10x, fantastic. Who cares? Rather than let's say 1,500.
If you were buying $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, you would probably care, right? Because you'd be getting a third more Bitcoin, blindly, no matter blind to the price at 1,500 or 2,000, getting a third more Bitcoin at 20,000, that really starts to add up, right? That's a lot more money now. If you're buying, it all ultimately does matter. Sure, you always want to capture the absolute bottom and sell at the absolute top. It's just basically impossible to do that. And trying to do that is pretty much folly. And I think it's Peter Lynch who said more money is lost trying to time the market than any other way. And I think there's something to that.
Okay, I'm the Crypto Skeptic, and I would like to ask you a Crypto Skeptic question, which is, let's play out another possible future where we look back in 5 years' time and we say, wow, so 20,000 from this point forward was the all-time high. And we had a gradual sort of drop, ups and downs, and a spiral down to a much lower number. Maybe it's $2,000, maybe it's 1,000, maybe Bitcoin is now worth zero. So let's not do the zero case scenario yet, but let's play out this scenario. What does it look like if this is the all-time highs? What would be the things that would happen from here on out that would perhaps, facilitate that outcome?
Okay. Well, beyond the obvious sort of like there's a major technical issue with Bitcoin, which is something we reference a lot on the show, the idea of, someone is able to successfully counterfeit a Bitcoin, which I think would tank the price probably forever, is my guess. Things like that do what's called a double spend, which is really the same idea of counterfeiting. But beyond that, which is the obvious thing of like, oh, this thing, not so great anymore. All its great qualities don't.
Can we just reference what, from a Bitcoin sort of knowledgeable person point of view, what percentage, like what kind of a probability is that someone could somehow hack the system and duplicate a Bitcoin or counterfeit one or kind of have something like that happen? Is that a real possibility?
Okay. I don't think it is. I am not the most technically proficient in Bitcoin and all the math behind Bitcoin exactly. I understand a fair amount of it. And I will say this, it's been 13 years. There's billions of dollars sitting in the Satoshi Nakamoto Bitcoin wallet, just sitting there. If you could hack that wallet, someone would have. That money would have been moved by now, for sure. It's just sitting there. The Satoshi's probably dead, honestly, because you figure at some point they might have moved a little bit out to, buy a nice home or something, but it just sits there. And it's sort of the ultimate proof that at least hacking a wallet is seemingly impossible, or at least up till now. And the cryptography, the numbers are so long with Bitcoin. These are literally the biggest numbers humans have ever created. Like, we've never seen numbers this big before in terms of the addresses and the ability to, like, sort of the odds of finding a particular address to get someone's Bitcoin. So it's beyond human comprehension, quite frankly, like how hard it is to do stuff like that. If it was possible, Bitcoin is created so it couldn't be counterfeited. And the blockchain is part of that whole thing. I guess we have to leave some possibility open that someone could figure out something that no one else has been able to, and that would actually work. But it seems incredibly unlikely, especially as Bitcoin has skyrocketed in value. And surely lots of people put a lot of time into this because the incredible riches that are at the end of that rainbow, if you can figure it out, right? Imagine you could steal some Bitcoin or counterfeit some Bitcoin, sell it all really quickly before everyone realized what was happening, make $1 billion, and then Bitcoin crashes, but you've got $1 billion in cash. What do you care? And you've done it. You made yourself a billionaire. Like that's a very realistic scenario if someone could counterfeit this stuff. No one's ever done it. I think like way less than 1%, like way less than 1%, like point.
Okay.
I would guess it's 0.001% or something. But I don't really know those numbers. Those are made up numbers.
From a decade of experience and that not happening, we'll fence that off as a possibility for now.
Yeah.
We'll just kind of discount that. So let's say then we look back in 5 years, we're like 20 grand was the high. Geez, I wish I'd sold some of my Bitcoin then. I don't have any, but Bitcoin people might be saying that because it was just a steady sort of, leg after leg downward. And now we're sitting here and we're at $1,000 or $2,000 per Bitcoin. What had to have occurred for that to happen?
I think one of the obvious things is that the world governments, all the industrialized nations, essentially ban it, make it illegal to use, or illegal to transact with, at least in any real way. I don't expect that to happen. I think that's very unlikely. But that would be I don't think that would be a death blow for Bitcoin, but that would certainly cap its upside tremendously, right? Most of the Bitcoin upside is in the idea that people around the world would use this and be able to transact with each other on a global level, instantly, cheaply, and effectively with a money that is hard and perfect, essentially, right? That's a big part of the idea. And if you don't feel like you can do that because you're afraid of getting all of your possessions taken away or being thrown in jail, that would, and no matter where you were, that would really hurt it tremendously. So that's the first and the most obvious setup, where Bitcoin ends up more like $1,000, and it's really only used by criminals and maybe rogue countries and things like that. So that's the most obvious one. Trying to think if there's any other. The other really obvious one, I guess, is that the mining power of Bitcoin concentrates into a few very wealthy companies, and they're able to sort of control the ledger more than we would want. And then from there, like, Bitcoin becomes a little less trustworthy. And if that trust is gone, I can't imagine the value of it would stay high. I imagine that would go. But that's a reason for those companies not to do it, right? They don't want to create a lack of trust in Bitcoin. They are like, if you're mining 10% of all Bitcoin a day or some incredible number like that, you have so much money invested in that, and you're getting all your rewards, all your payment is in Bitcoin. Like, you do not want to crash the price of Bitcoin at all. Now, I'm sure there are ways around some of that pieces logistically, but as a general thought, it would be a very strange and unusual thing. Also, at this point, Bitcoin's so expensive, and there's so many miners, it's almost impossible, I think, to have that much of the mining power anyway, even 10%. You might see a country where that much is located, but one entity controlling that seems hard to imagine. But that would be another scenario, I think, if Amazon decided to do all the Bitcoin mining and bought it all up, and had, spent billions and billions of dollars buying it all up, essentially. I guess people might say, I don't like the idea of Amazon potentially controlling the ledger. Maybe they'll change things at some points that are more favorable to them. And maybe people would shy away from it. But that's a reason, again, for Amazon not to do it anyway. The incentives line up relatively well here.
It seems like every large country has their version of the Fed, where they can print and control their money supply. So why would governments, now that Bitcoin's becoming bigger, and it's on their radar in a way that it wasn't the last time we had the peak in 2017, 2018, where we went up to 20 grand. It was like, oh my God, this phenomena of Bitcoin. For a lot of people, they heard about it for the first time. It's no longer that. Everybody's heard of it. It's on all the government's radar. The cap, the market cap for crypto and Bitcoin is, I don't know what it was in 2017, but it's close to $1 trillion now?
The crypto market cap is right around $1 trillion. Bitcoin, I think, is around 300 billion right now, give or take.
So why would governments allow that power to leave their hands, basically to go into just the hands of, particularly very wealthy people around the world, who would be able to escape tax, escape regulation, and just have a much clearer runway without government control? So isn't that an argument that as it gets bigger, that there's more and more incentive for governments to ban it or to try to overregulate it?
Well, I don't know that you necessarily can escape tax or regulation easily. There's a blockchain that's public where every single transaction ever is on there. So you can't hide your transactions super well. And if you're doing for any kind of forensic analysis, it's not hard to figure out whose wallets belong to who. Now, I'm sure there are people who are good enough at this to hide their identities with it, but that's like, the hacker, the 0.01% hackers of the world. There's always going to be guys like that. But for all the rest of us, the people the government are actually interested in taxing, they won't be able to hide their money via Bitcoin easily, I don't think, and avoid taxes that way. But to the bigger part of your question is, why would governments allow this to happen at all? Well, I think there's two answers, maybe even three. One answer is not all governments actually have this kind of power that you're talking about, right? Industrialized nations do, the G7 does, G9, or the G9 now, whatever they are. They do, but there's lots of countries that do not. Many countries operate on other countries' fiat currency. The dollar is a big one, but not the only one by any means. Where, like, for example, Ecuador doesn't have their own currency. They have the US. So they are at the mercy of the United States' monetary policy at all times and have no say in it at all. So it's worse than something like Bitcoin, where instead of, like with Bitcoin, while they don't have control over the monetary policy, it's entirely predictable. It cannot be changed. Versus the US monetary policy, which changes fairly regularly depending on how much money they want to print up any particular day or what they want to do, right? And sometimes there's a pandemic and things change, or they want to, put out give everyone stimulus checks or whatever it is they decide they want to do this day. And Ecuador is sort of at the mercy of the changing volume of dollars, and it hurts them. It lowers the value of their dollars, and that's not good for the country. So Bitcoin, they know exactly what the monetary policy is. So that would be attractive to developing nations, at least certain developing nations, I think, anyway. That's number one. Number two, with almost all of industrialized nations, rich folk kind of run them ultimately to differing degrees, of course. Yes, there are democratic elections in most of these places. I'm not saying these elections are false, but I think America's a great example, actually, where they don't even really try and pretend anymore that they're not being, like the people who give them money, there's lobbyists whose entire job is to just try and to get to meet with senators and congressmen and whatever and convince them to make policy in one direction or another. And it's been like that for a long time. And it's very clear that whoever gives money gets the kinds of votes they want. Look at who the NRA gives money to and look at how they vote. It's very clear, right? And that isn't just for guns. That's you could run the table with that kind of stuff, and you'll almost never see people voting against the folks who are giving them money in the United States. Of course, that's not perfect, and of course, that isn't always true. But as a generalization, I think that is true. My point being, rich people run the United States, more or less, and in general have a tremendously disproportionate say in how policy is enacted in all industrialized countries. And so if they are pro-Bitcoin, it's going to be incredibly hard for these countries to say, we're going to make it illegal. Incredibly hard. And so at this point, I think the genie's a little bit out of the bottle on that one. And it's hard to put it back in and say at this point, hey, well, we're doing it anyway. I think it's too late. They could have done it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think they can do it now. So that's another one anyway. That feels really important and really big. Finally, okay. Is it really a country's place to even allow this kind of a thing or not? It's not a legal activity. You could make it illegal, but there's no downside. It's just another form of payment. It's just another currency ultimately.
Yeah. Quick hit thought on where 5 years from now, and in one scenario, Bitcoin is $100,000 or more. And in the other scenario, Bitcoin is somewhere in the range, under $10,000. So quick summary on what's happened if 5 years from now it's 100,000 or more, and quick summary if what's happened if it's below 10,000.
The only thing that has to happen for Bitcoin to be $100,000 or more is we have to not be in a global depression, I think. And like, that's about it. Like, I think it will naturally find its way 5 years from now to 100,000 or so. It might be a little less than 5 years, but I expect it fully to hit a new all-time high within the next 5 years. I'd be really surprised if it didn't. That's probably more like 2.5 years away from now, to be clear, at least. But so I don't think much has to happen for it to do that. Perhaps we'll be in such a global macro situation that it gets dragged down and can't do it. But assuming any kind of normalcy, I'd be really surprised if it didn't. The other way, $10,000 or less, or even 1,000. Sort of the things we've been talking about already. The global macro picture is dire. There is some other technical issues. There is someone who controls too much of the Bitcoin mining. Those are the most obvious ones anyway. I guess there could be also a different crypto that replaces it that either doesn't exist yet or isn't being used that way. But there's no one really vying for that particular crown, as opposed to Ethereum's smart contract platform crown, which everyone's vying for. There's, probably 100 different coins trying to do that. Then there may be like 10 very serious contenders to the throne. No one's really trying to take on the store of value narrative. I understand. I put quotes around it because it's a little questionable as a narrative, but no one's really even trying to take that one on. Bitcoin is its own thing. It's got massive network effects. It's a huge brand already unto itself. And I don't expect it to be dethroned by anyone else. But I guess that is another way it ends up being below 10,000.
Okay, terrific. Thanks for sharing that. That is this week's episode of the Crypto Fatcat and the Crypto Skeptic. So you heard it here first. In 5 years, Bitcoin is potentially going to be worth $1,000 or in that region, or maybe 100,000 or more. Let's hope for all of us that we're not in a global depression. There's no spiral that comes out of this, and that we are in a more normal economy. So probably best for everyone if that is the case, and if that turns out to be a positive for Bitcoin as well. Okay, we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. If you like this, hit the like button and subscribe.